Welcome to Tommy Solo's Famous Friends. This is a special in memory of segment, and today we are celebrating the life and times of the recently departed Myles Goodwyn. May he rest in peace. I could not have picked three better fellows to talk about life with Myles than Jim, Ritchie, and David Henman. Welcome, boys.
Hi,
Good
Tommy.
morning.
Hey, Tommy.
So it's good to have you all here. I wish it could be under better circumstances, sad as it may. I understand that, Jim, you were the first one to actually play in an official band with Myles. Now, I know that you all met before that, and your common grandparents, I guess Myles lived next door during the summer. But how did the first band start, Woody's Termite, Jim?
Well, Miles and I had met that first year in '63 when I moved to Rich and I and Dave's old home there in Waverly. Really just a summer home. And we had met one day when I moved there, and he came running across and said, "Who plays guitar? Somebody plays guitar here." And I said, "Yeah, I do." So we started playing every day, actually, in the woodshed. I don't know if you and Dave and Rich, if you remember the woodshed alongside our grandparents' house there. But that was we called it Club de Shane. And we played every day. Yeah, no kidding, Club de Shane days. So we played there every day after school. And on the weekends, we'd get in and jam. And my brother Bob would get on Mom's sugar cans and flour cans and attempt to give us some kind of beat. He didn't have, we called it the Dinks beat. Didn't have quite the groove we wanted. But anyways, I was going to Sidney Stephen High School in Bedford, and every year they had a variety show. And this particular year, I think it was my first year there actually, they decided they wanted a band. And I don't know the particulars of that, but Dougie Grace, who's now a good friend of mine, he asked me if I would play. I said, sure. So I didn't have a bass or anything. All I had was a guitar. So we had two guitars, a drummer, a little keyboard player. He was about 13 years old, Greg Stephen, little teeny guy, and Dave Dodsworth on drums. And we played Love Potion Number 9. I remember that. That was the song, Love Potion Number 9. So whatever year that was on the top 10, that's the year that what was to become Woody's Termites started. So I didn't care for the guitar player during rehearsals. And I mentioned to Dougie, I said, I got a friend back in Waverly, that nice guitar player. I think he'd fit good here. So maybe we could just trade guitar players. So that's what we did. And Myles came in, and I became a bass player at that point. All we had was this Echo, I think they're called, or Eco. I don't know.
Eco, yeah. EKO, Italian.
Yeah, that's it, David. The Italian guitars. And I had this black, I think it was black, and Myles didn't have an electric guitar. So I went to my dad, and our dads, both Rich and Dave's dad and my dad, were both very generous guys, really nice dads in many, many ways. And I said, Dad, look, we want to start this band. Myles doesn't have a guitar, electric guitar. I want to give him mine, but we need a bass, and I'll play bass if you could get me a bass. So I don't know. I don't know how long it was before I talked him into that. I probably begged him a lot. But anyways, he went into Nyforth in Dartmouth, and he bought an Eco bass. And so I became a bass player. That's how it happened. It was through no intent of my own. And so this thing, which was called Creatures, for the variety show, became Woody's Termites, and we kept that going for a couple of years. And I think Dave and Rich, I think you guys came to see us once there at the old fire hall.
Yeah, I saw you at the old fire hall. I was living in Newfoundland at the time, but I had flown home on Halifax I think to bring back my grandfather's car or something. And I had some time off on a Friday night, I guess. I went out to see Woody's Termites at the Bedford Fire Hall. And it was really probably one of the most competent and powerful cover bands I had seen up to that time, and probably for a long time after. I remember, and you guys did you didn't do easy stuff, like look through any window by the Hollies with all the harmonies and everything. That's not easy stuff to do. Good Lovin' by the Young Rascals. and a lot of R&B, Knock on Wood, and Midnight Hour, of course, the standards in R&B, it was pretty impressive because it was a wider range of material than David and I were capable of playing in our bands, and indeed most bands I saw couldn't cover quite that range of material that Woody's Termites covered. And the place was packed. That's the other thing I remember. The place was packed. And I understand it was always that way when the Termites played.
You guys,
Sorry, David.
You guys were also writing, because some of the songs that you guys wrote ended up as April Wine songs.
Yeah, that you're right, Dave. And the one song in particular, I think it was two songs that Myles had written. I wrote a few too. We were just starting to write then.
That's right.
He wrote that song, "You Won't Dance with Me," and he had another song called "Why," and they're both slow songs. And at some point during his career with April Wine, he brought those two songs out again and put them together.
Yeah. And
made them covered them under the name of "You Won't Dance with Me," and a really nice version. We played it in the acoustic show, and people just love that song. It's incredible. I guess it must have done quite well for them. I don't know the history of it.
Little story for you here, Jim. I saw Myles perform with April Wine, perform "You Won't Dance with Me" at Place de Nation in Montreal. After we had left the band, and I went in the dressing room and drank all the April Wine's booze. But Myles performed that song in front of something like 40,000 people. And he asked if there was any girl in the audience who would dance with him. They had a mirror ball above him. Asked if any girl in the audience would come up and dance with him. And of course, I mean, just about every girl in that audience wanted to dance with him. And knowing Myles' history, I was standing there watching. I burst into tears.
Wow. That's great.
That's such an amazing song. You know, that was the first song that I covered as a lead vocalist in a band, in my first bar band. I didn't want to sing at all. I was the lead guitar player, but they basically said, "You can sing this April Wine song." And I got into it, and I love that song. I got right into the role, and it was such a, the emotion that Myles put into that. When you look at the construction of that song, it's not really a masterpiece in terms of the arrangement, but it's a really emotional and powerful song.
And a little humor in there too, if you notice.
Oh yeah. And you know what was really caught me about that song is when he came in from the verse into the chorus, he dragged it just a little. I called it dragged. It just put it in a different feel. It just kind of went and just went, whoa. Yeah. It was such a beautiful little touch. He did have amazing sensibility, I should say, when it comes to rhythm and feel. He really quite nice.
Well, he had such a unique voice. I know that before he left us, he did actually pick his own replacement to tour with April Wine, and Mark Perron, who's apparently doing a bang-up job. But you don't see April Wine tribute bands out there, and that's, I feel, because Myles' voice was so unique. He didn't have the absolute greatest range of any singer out there. He wasn't necessarily the most powerful singer out there, but his voice was so Myles Goodwyn.
Yeah, I think there's a little thing there, Dave and Rich. If we remember back, he didn't sing hardly at all.
No.
When we first started the band, he didn't sing because. Go ahead, Rich. You were going to say something.
When we started that band and first brought it up to Montreal, Myles sang, I suppose, almost a third of the material. I think you and David and Myles were probably split roughly into thirds for the lead vocals, but Miles' on stage persona at first, when we first came up here, was he'd literally stand with his back to his amplifier and head down. And when it was time for him to sing, whether it was the lead vocal or the harmony, he would then take those 3 steps to the mic and always with his eyes closed and sing his part. Very little movement, physical movement. And as soon as he was done singing, he'd back up to his amplifier and stand there with his back. He was very, very shy on stage. I think we knew he could be a front man. It just took a little while to push him out there and get him to open his eyes and look straight at the crowd and say, these are my songs. This is me singing my songs. But it took a while.
I only remember him singing 1 or 2 songs in Woody's Termites, and I might have sang 1 or 2 too. We were not vocalists, neither one of us. But and when we had Prism before April Wine, the band that I joined with you and Dave, we kind of shared the vocals, I think, between you and I, didn't we?
That's right.
Yeah, between you and I. And so I didn't think that Myles was a vocalist when we started April Wine. I had never really heard him sing, or the times I did in Woody's Termites, I don't recall that well, So I was surprised when he started developing his voice the way he did, because he became such a recognizable voice and really knew how to use his voice. Really knew.
And he knew how to write for his voice.
Of course, yes. He
Tommy,
picked everything.
This might be a good
That's really important.
segue into how April Wine originally formed.
Yes.
If you're interested in hearing that story one more time.
Absolutely, yeah.
We had this, as Jimmy mentioned, we had this band called Prism. It preceded the Vancouver band called Prism that came a few years later. That was me and Ritchie and Jim, and occasionally George Mack on keys. And so anyway, we had I think that band had disbanded. I'm not sure, but anyway, we were at a point we were frustrated. We were playing places, and we were starting to write, and we were playing places in Halifax where people would shout out, "Hey, buddy, play something we know, eh?" And so we're getting frustrated with that. So Jim and I, we were always talking about, Jim and I, about what the problems were, what we wanted to do. We met one morning at the Orchard. Was it the Orchard Tavern?
The old mill. The old
mill tavern in Dartmouth. And we were sitting there over a beer. I'm pretty sure it was morning, could have been afternoon, could have been midday.
I don't remember.
And we decided, we were talking about what we wanted to do. We wanted to put a band together. We wanted to do something. And Jim mentioned that Myles had moved to North Sydney, and he was performing with
Eastgate Sanctuary
in Northern Sydney. And Jim said, "I can call Myles. I'll bet he'll come down and help us put a band together." So he did. He called Myles. Myles got off the train with a green garbage bag with everything he owned in it. And I think he also had his guitar, a melody maker or something.
Gibson. Gibson melody maker.
Yeah, and he showed up. So we scheduled a rehearsal. My parents were living in Lower Sackville. We had our first rehearsal on December 1st, I think, 1969. And we had decided we wanted to write, but we had decided, well, we should probably play cover songs and sneak in our originals. And at that point in the rehearsal, Myles played some riff from hell. And we looked at each other. He had written this riff. We looked at each other and said, "No covers. We're going original."
Yeah.
And the rest was history. Yeah, no kidding. Now, speaking of rehearsals and so on, I know at one point when I spoke to you, David, about your career, you were telling me that in the early days, you guys in the rented house, you would listen to Led Zeppelin all day long.
We April Wine formed right around the time of those first 2 Led Zeppelin albums, which just, blew the top of our heads off. Music was going in that direction, and Led Zeppelin kind of like, here it is, folks. Here's all the heavy rock and roll you're ever going to need. And at the time, it was. When we moved to Montreal, we got in on April 1st, 1970, we got in a van that my dad had financed for us, a GMC window van, and we had a total of $100 on us, and we made it as far as Montreal. And where was I going with this?
Well, you were saying you were going somewhere, but I think I'd like to interject a little about this, and Rich, I think you'll agree with me. We had done a demo at your
Oh,
place.
yeah, that's right. We had done a demo, which we sent
Yes.
to Montreal, to Donald K. Donald's office. And our agent told us that Donald was impressed and he wanted to see us, which was total bollocks.
It was stupid. It was a big lie.
We headed to Montreal. This is so funny. We headed to Montreal. We got to Montreal and we called Donald K. Donald's office. And they said, "Oh, Donald's at a bar called Laugh-In, and they're holding a press conference." Well, we were so naive that we actually thought that press conference was for us. So we headed to Laugh-In. We walked in the door. There was a fellow named Tom. The place was empty. We were there early. There's a fellow named Tom behind the bar. And we walked up the bar and he says, "What would you guys like to drink?" And so we ordered a drink and went to pay for it. And they said, "Oh, no, that's no problem." So we thought, oh, this really is for us. So we sat in our chairs, place filled up. There was a dais at the front. Donald was in the center with all the other industry people around him, and announced that there was going to be a Woodstock style festival in upstate New York.
And that's what it was about. It wasn't about us at all.
It wasn't about us at all.
But we learned the first valuable lesson in that relationship with Donald, which was put it on Donald's tab.
Yeah.
Yes. I don't know if you that video, Ritchie, that we were discussing earlier. There's a couple of times when Donald, a younger Donald, who's probably in his 40s or so, 50s maybe, he talks about how much he liked that April Wine Band the first time he had heard them.
That's
so
right.
So I guess he heard us first at Laugh-In, where David was talking about.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. Because because
we did go back there and play. Yeah.
Yeah. At that press conference, I saw Donald come walking down the aisle, and I stood up and said, "Hi, David. I'm David Henman or hi, Donald. I'm David Henman from April Wine." And he says, "Oh, well, give me a call next week." So we did. We called next week.
I see. That was the most interesting experience in that respect that they really didn't expect us to come up there. They really didn't.
Yeah.
And we get there, and I think they felt a little sorry for us, so they helped us and put us up.
Yeah.
And I think we stayed at Sandy McLean's for a little while.
McLean's, and then we were at that hotel on Guy Street.
Oh there. God, Mackay Street.
Mackay Street, yeah.
And then sent to her.
It was actually our naivety, the fact that we were so green that Donald kind of took that got his attention.
He heard something there, and he was right in hearing something. But David, you'll vote for me on this. We were in September. We went up as part of April Wine to do the Walk of Fame tour or whatever it was, induction. And you were sitting there talking to this guy, and I didn't know who the heck he was, but he looked so familiar to me. And it was Terry Flood, our original manager when we were with the band. And I said, God. I said, "Terry, how are you?" and all that. And I introduced myself. He remembered me. And we kept talking a little. And he said to me, he said, "Jim," he said, "we had no idea what the hell we were doing." They were as new as we were.
Yeah.
They were as
It's
new
true.
as we were.
all, the people at Donald K. Donald, Terry Flood Management, we all kind of arrived at the same place at the same time. And from there, we made it up as we went. But the enthusiasm, the enthusiasm that everybody had and the ability to think outside the box and create marketing and strategies and all those important things was what made it all work.
What we didn't know at that time was that the Maple system had come into play.
That's right.
Where there was no industry, no music industry in Canada whatsoever on any level of professional. There were no studios on any big extent. There was no management. There was no nothing, and we were right there when this thing had been set up, and a Canadian band could actually get CRTC. That was it. Thank you, Ritchie.
Yeah.
And a Canadian band could actually get a recording contract, could actually record, could actually get radio play on radio, guaranteed radio play because of the 30% thing, and it just built the industry. And we were right there, right just as it was ready to hatch.
Timing.
So they were hiring a lot of different bands at that time, and whoever kind of, I remember Myles used to say, "Well, we had one chance on that first album, April Wine album, the Feed album. Yeah. If we could get a little single off of that did something on the radio, then they would give us the opportunity, to do a second album, which happened.
Yeah,
that's how you guys got to do on record." Without
you guys were really part of that whole evolution in the Canadian music scene, and you mentioned CanCon was just coming in, and Donald K. Donald was, if not the first, one of the very first agencies to book national tours across Canada. So you guys were right on the cusp and the leading edge of Canadian music history. So that's something. That's really something, So I understand, though, that before April Wine was actually put together, Myles had moved to Toronto for a while. So was there anything that any of you did that you think might have influenced him to come back to the Maritimes and
that was a different situation. He when we formed April Wine, Myles was living in North Sydney, Cape Breton. I think you're right. That's one point before that. Previous to that, I think he had moved to Toronto for a period. I don't remember.
I can speak to that, David, because I remember. Because what happened was he left Woody Termites for a year, and he went to Brantford to go to school, and he did a year there. And I don't know the details why he came back home, but he did come back home after a year. But what happened, which didn't happen, I think, to you two guys and to me, was he got exposed to big shows, concerts with a lighting and sound systems at that level. It was like probably 67 when he was there. So he got exposed to things that we weren't really exposed to down here. We hadn't seen yet down being here in the Maritime. And he came back with all kinds of ideas. We used to sit out in Dad's car smoking Dad's cigarette butts because Dad always smoked his cigarettes, kept them about that long and left them in the ashtray. And we knew that. We'd go in the old car, the Meteor, and we'd sit there talking about the music that he had seen up in Ontario and the dream that he had. And I mean, I think that precipitated something in him, that he had an idea where he could go, what he could do. He just didn't know how to do it. But he had a vision. He had a vision. Yeah.
So I understand that, Jim, you left the band after the first April Wine album, and you went on to get into your career in medical research and so on. And Ritchie and David, you stayed for the next two, but ultimately you all left April Wine. And I understand that a while after that, David, Myles contacted you and said, I want to keep things going. Would you mind if I kept the name April Wine?
Something like that. Yeah. I mean, just to jump back a little bit, when Jim was still in the band, we recorded that first album at RCA Studios with Bill Hill producing. And at that, Donald had a complete setup. I approached Terry Flood in the parking lot, and he agreed to manage us, and they got us. They had kind of in-house everything. So they sent us into RCA recording studios, where one of the songs on that first album, the one with the feet on it, was a song called "Fast Train." Am I right on that one?
Yeah.
Fast Train on the first one. That was a song that Myles wrote, and it got radio play immediately. I don't know how high up in the charts it went. It was probably top 40, if not top 10, but it put us on the map. It's a powerful song that stood the test of time. You can still listen to it today, and it sounds as fresh as it did in 1970 or 71.
Trying to find some peace of mind. It's a fast train.
And that's the song so Myles pretty much, with that song, pretty much put April Wine on the map, or at least blew open the doors. And then, like you say, after the first year, Jim and I were living together actually a lot. We spent a lot of time living together. We spent a lot of time together, and Jim was having just second thoughts about the whole. I think I'll let Jim speak for himself, but the whole rock and roll lifestyle.
Mm.
And so he decided he wanted to, go back to maybe a simpler. Jim, you tell the story.
Well, my recollection is probably as foggy as yours, but I do remember being very frustrated because I found that I was a folky. This is the thing about our conglomeration that we had put together.
Yeah.
I was a folky, bluesy type of acoustic guitar player who had moved into bass. Never a high-end bass player like Jimmy Clench proved to be a very, very nice bass player, very melodic and beautiful lines. I wasn't at that point, and I didn't seem to be interested in it. What I seemed to be interested in was the party side of it and the playing side of it, but I wasn't really doing the working that I should be doing. So I didn't realize that back then what was going on, but I was into alcohol and drugs far too much. And when we were working on the second album, we were going to rehearsals. I remember going through a very despaired type of time because Jimi Hendrix had died. I believe Janis Joplin had died, and Jim Morrison had died. And it was all connected to drugs of some sort. And I was into drugs too, along with my booze consumption. And I was scared to death that I was going to take something in a blackout, because I was having blackouts when I was drinking. And I thought we were only, what, in early 20s? Something like that,
Yeah,
22, 24?
20s, yeah.
21, 22.
Yeah, and I was kind of scared. And I felt hopeless and trapped. And I did what I now know to be a geographical cure. I decided that I would leave the band because I figured that all my problems would go away. But my problems were inside of me, and I took them home with me. So that's what happened, and I didn't really tell the guys. We grew up, Tommy. We grew up in a life. We did, anyways, with our parents' generation because of the war. I think how it affected people and everything. We never shared feelings, us men. We never shared our feelings. We never showed anything about how we were going on inside of us. And fortunately, the younger people of our children's generation and the next are learning that it's not very good. And I was in that generation when my dad was a Second World War soldier over there and got wounded and all that, and had lived that life. And you didn't show your feelings. You didn't talk about anything like that. So I didn't talk to Ritchie. I didn't talk to David. I never talked to Myles because he wasn't approachable. He's the type of guy that would just kind of say, as he did when I said I was going to quit. He just said, "Okay, go do it." There was no sitting down and talking about anything in those days. So that's what happened. I just we were in the car. I remember, Ritchie, you were driving. I think it was. Did you have a convertible then?
Yeah.
Yeah, we were in the convertible heading for a rehearsal. We were getting ready for the second CD, and on record
Album with no
the
CD.
second album. Oh yeah, that's right, David. The second album, and I remember sitting in the back seat with David, Dave and I were in the back seat, and I was and Ritchie were in the front. And I said, "What would you guys say if I said I was thinking of leaving?" And Myles said, "Well, you should leave then. No talk, no conversation, no trying to find out why."
Yeah.
So
It was pretty matter of fact. Yeah,
it was.
always was.
He was always pretty matter of fact. He had that side to him that was kind of cut and dried. But so
Well,
that's the story.
it's interesting, when you mention how the war affected the men and the young men that came later of the day, and it's interesting to me that Myles was always such an emotional, passionate singer. And as you say, he was very curt and to the point in life off stage. So it's interesting to me how he seemed to let his emotions and his passions out in his music and in his songwriting.
You have to realize his situation was different than Dave and Rich and I, in that he lost his mom when he was 10 years old. And that affected him very, very, very profoundly. As a matter of fact, it affected him his whole life. And he was closed. He was part of him that was closed. And music was his refuge. That was where he went.
And you saw that in the incredible intensity of his singing and his playing. Standing beside him on stage, boy, that was an experience to watch him play guitar and sing with such burning intensity. Just amazing.
Yeah, it's passion.
It's interesting, how loss and tragedy can really impact us as artists. I know that when I was a young fella, my grandmother said to me at one point, you're a pretty good guitar player and you're not a bad singer. She said, but you'll never be great until your heart is broken. And at the time, I just thought, oh, she's old. What does she know? And then years later, I lost my only son. And now I know. So I can emphasize with that part of Myles' life, having a deep and tragic loss. Roy Orbison, another case, so passionate in his singing and his songwriting, and he had tragedy and trauma. So, having said all that, we were all very fortunate to have had Myles among us and to have been able to enjoy the music over the years. Now, I'm interested in the fact that even though you all eventually left April Wine, you maintained your friendships over the years. That's not something that's very common in the music
some
business.
degree. I mean, Jim and Myles grew up together. They were childhood friends, so that's a bond that was never, as far as I know, that's a bond that was never broken.
No, never.
But the part of the problem, we never really bonded as a band, unfortunately. That's always bothered me. And the reason that we never bonded as a band is because we made it so quickly. We made it with it where bands like the Beatles and the Stones and so on had to suffer through endless rejections from recording companies and so on, and starved together, living in cramped squats in London, England, and so on and so forth. We made it in a matter of months through whatever serendipity. We talked about some of the things with Donald Donald, with our timing with Maple and so on and so forth. So we made it so quickly that we never had that opportunity to really bond as musicians and as players. So I've always regretted that. I never, we never were enemies, but I never felt, and believe me, Myles has loomed so large in my subconscious for the past 50 years. I can tell you about my gig nightmares, which came to fruition when Myles invited me on stage with April Wine some 45 years after the fact, as like a guest appearance kind of thing. But Myles has always not, he's always been in the back of my mind. He's been a huge influence on me. Just, tremendous admiration for his passion for music. And going back a little further, when we had an April Wine band house, and we were, musicians always are looking for ways to kill time. And so we spent a lot of time doing whatever were doing, whether it was partying or whatever it was. Miles had his bedroom door closed and he was in there doing two things. One, teaching himself piano because he
Mhm.
convinced the management to buy me piano, and two, studying a book by Clive Davis called How to Write for Radio. And
Mhm.
so there's the reason why Miles has carried the ball for over 5 decades, is his work ethic, and it just it's I have just an immense respect for what he's accomplished. He earned every dime, every accolade the old-fashioned way through sheer hard work. He just was relentless.
And just in time, he was inducted into the Canadian Songwriters Hall of Fame. So I don't know about you guys. I'm just really glad that happened before it was too late. But one of the things that I took away from that was his comments about not being the best guitar player, not being the best singer, not being the best songwriter, but he was very skilled at writing popular songs. And so I think he really downplayed himself and
He
really
did.
underestimated his
Yeah,
ability.
you
You know,
listen to his vocal phrasing. He's no slouch as a singer or a guitar player.
no, and again, yeah, and I remember you telling me at some point, David, how blown away you were by his guitar playing in the early days. I mean, we all evolve as musicians, but it seems like he was kind of head and shoulders above at that point. Now, I know that you all went your separate ways. If you do you have any favorite memories of your time spent with Miles?
I'll go. I'll go
Okay.
first. I going right back to the very beginning, like Jimmy touched on quite a while ago, playing with Miles in the woods between my grand Nana's house and Miles's house. When I first met him, we were probably 7, 8 years old, and Miles was instantly cool because he had that Davy Crockett coonskin hat.
Yeah, yeah.
If you were 7, 8 years old, whatever, 1957, 58, 59, whatever it was, the kid with the coonskin cap, he was cool right away. And then later on, I remember again, like it was yesterday, and again at my grandmother's house, but down, this was after Jimmy and his family had moved in there. And now Miles and Jimmy are playing guitars. And my grandmother had this little cabin built down by the water. You'd use it to change when you went in to swim. And I think we might have had a rowboat down there. Anyway, David and I were out with our families visiting Jimmy's family. And so naturally, the four musicians all gravitated down to the cabin where Jimmy and Miles had their guitars. And Miles sat down, two of them sat down. Jimmy said, Miles, play those songs you wrote. And Miles played You Won't Dance With Me and Why. And David and I kind of looked at each other, and I'm pretty sure we talked about it on the way home in the car. And we said, "Oh boy, we got our work cut out for us because these guys are just a few steps ahead of us."
Hmm.
And those are my strongest memories of Miles when I was really young. And then later, when we came up here in the band, we had that band house up in Saint Sauveur in the mountains, a ski shack that you could get cheap in the summer. And we get up. I don't know if you remember, Jim. We'd get up at about 5 or 6 in the morning and go fishing up in a brook just up near Morin Heights, get some trout,
Yeah, yeah.
bring it home and fry it up. And another time, Miles and I decided to try and scale that rock face at the north entrance.
Oh, yeah.
Got about halfway up, and of course took a smoke break because when you're 20, smoking is mandatory. And chickened out. We looked up, we chickened out, we looked down, and it was like, oh, how the hell are we going to get out of here? So we eventually scrambled back down like a couple of girls and just kept our mouths shut about it. That was our adventure in rock climbing.
That's pretty neat.
We were better with music. And I just want to add one other thing there. David talked about the speed, David and Jimmy both, the speed with which everything happened. We arrived in Montreal on April the 1st, 1970. On July the 1st, 3 months later to the day, we were on stage at Place des Nations in front of 40,000 people as part of this Canada Day celebration. And we were representing all of maritime Canada, all of Atlantic Canada in 3 short months. And things just happened so fast, but we were in the right place at the right time.
Yeah.
Plain
Jim,
simple.
you must have a ton of memories.
Well,
In fact, he wrote a book about it. Oh, sorry,
yeah.
Jim, go ahead.
Wow, this is interesting because I've spent so much time with Myles the last 10 years
Yeah.
since he moved back to Nova Scotia, and we were always in contact. When he'd come to town, we'd see each other. When he was living in the Bahamas, we'd talk on the phone. Gee, I don't know who was paying those phone bills, but you know, and I was close to his wife too, Phyllis. I didn't get to know the kids very well until lately, but so there was a relationship there. You know, I look at it this way, guys, and you can all identify with this, I'm sure. And we have it in our marriages, most of us. We love each other and we tolerate each other. That is the only way I can describe the relationship that I had with Myles all these years. We loved each other, we tolerated each other. We had our fights, we had our arguments, we had our times when we had to forgive each other. I remember one instance where we actually had to do that. We had to forgive each other, you know, because we had hurt each other.
Yeah.
But we were able to work through all that. And I mean, I played with him these last 6 years in the acoustic. First, it started as a duo, which was really neat. Then it moved to a trio with Bruce, which added these harmonies, this kind of a Crosby, Stills, Nash type of harmony. And I just love harmonies. I mean, I love singing harmonies. I'm always the David Crosby in the harmony, which I just love. So comfortable. And then we brought in a drummer this year, Steve Gates, and it was doing all those songs that he had worked so hard to write, and you know, I appreciated him very much, like David was saying, how hard he worked. I saw it when we were together in the band the first couple of years. We were never on the same direction. The four of us were never in the same direction. I remember starting that band and saying, okay, well, we'll use it as a platform for each one of us to go do our own little thing. I remember that and saying,
Yeah.
wow.
I think you know what you're talking about, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
I have that same memory. You know, it's funny. That's probably another reason why we didn't form that bond. Was because we started the band thinking, okay, we'll just put this band together. We'll be famous in no
And then jump
time,
off.
and then
Yeah,
we'll be solo artists.
yeah, yeah. Oh my God,
Um,
we were naive.
I'll tell you, my favorite memory of Myles after the band split up. And then Myles reformed the band with new players around him. And we had recorded Electric Jewels. And the next album that was after Electric Jewels, Myles and we stayed close for quite a while after that. He would invite me to he had an apartment with Phyllis in the West Islands, invited me out one evening for dinner. And after dinner, he had this little tiny walk-in closet, which was his music room, with his acoustic guitar and a little cassette recorder. And that was his studio all his life, was that little cassette recorder. He didn't demo his recordings like I did with my home studio, my multi-tracks, a little recorder. So he took me in that after dinner, he took me in that little room. We sat on the floor and he played Stand Back, the album Stand Back, in its entirety. He hadn't taken these songs into the studio. He had written them, and he had his little cassette machine there that he used for demos. He played every song on Stand Back its entirety for me. And I sat there and I couldn't believe what I was hearing. And I heard the songs in their finished form in my head, and when the album Stand Back came out, that's what I heard. I heard it exactly the way I heard it when he played it for me acoustically, played the songs for me acoustically, and I could hear where he was going. I knew exactly where he was going with the songs, and so that that's my favorite April Wine album. That goes without saying.
That's very interesting, David, because I heard it with a demo of it with Jerry, him, and Jim,
Hmm.
just the three of them.
Yeah.
I was in Montreal for something, and I heard the whole album stand back with just the three of them, and I was blown away. I really was. I was blown away. But I wanted to add something about when you say memories. I mean, I'm not gonna live in any of those memories we had back then that much. I don't think, but I will live in some of the memories that he and I made this last couple of years. And one of them was we wrote songs together, which we had never done because it's like Rich said, we were four different entities. You know, we didn't write together. The only song we wrote together was Wench, the first Wench on the first album. We all contributed to that song, but that was the only song we contributed to. We were all these little individuals who are not bonded, who are different styles and backgrounds, and we're trying to do something that we thought was, you know, we didn't know any better. That is, you know, but that's the way. None of us could have the bond like Rich and Dave had a bond between them, and Myles and I had a bond between us. But we never really merged the two things that much. Even though they were my cousins, I knew them personally, but I'd only played with them for maybe a year, guys, with Prism.
That's right.
Yeah, something like that. So when Myles and I put this acoustic thing together and we started writing songs together, that was, for me, the memory that I will have of playing with them on stage again, working with them, traveling with them, but also writing. I had some of these children, which I had written for the kids that got shot down in Florida there about 5 years ago. And when the indigenous children were found, the graves, I wanted to rewrite it for the indigenous children. And I knew Myles had an interest in that thing because his wife, Kim, she is indigenous.
Yeah.
So I took it to him and I said, and he always loved the song. We used to play it occasionally. He loved the song. So I said, let's rewrite it, and in the direction of talking about the indigenous children, which we did, and we released it as a single. But people don't want to hear about that on the radio too much. So, and then we wrote a Christmas song. We decided we both like to have a Christmas song, and I'd never written a Christmas song, and he had never written one. And so we did Ring the Bells. It's Christmas time. And we did this incredible version. And working with him in the studio with David and Rich, it was such an amazing thing to see how this man worked in the studio. He had crafted that so well. And we did work on another couple of tunes together, and he called me a week before he died, 2 weeks before he died. He had gone to the hospital, and then he was back home, and he called me. He said, I want you and Suzanne to come out to the house. I have a song I want to leave with you. And I said, oh. He said, it's a Christmas song. And he wasn't able to finish it. He just didn't have it in him. And so we went out, and it was very emotional going out because he was quite ill. He was in a walker. And he said, come on in the other room. He said, well, I'll play it for you. And you record it on your iPhone. So I went in the other room, put the iPhone down. He played me this song. It was called Alleluia. And he had no words really for it. And as he was singing, I'm thinking, oh, this is about the first Christmas. This is somebody witnessing the first Christmas that lives today. And they're witnessing it. They're actually seeing it. They're experiencing it and all the things that happen. So I'll finish that at some point, that song. But those things were kind of the highlight for me of, and you know, as much as Dave and I and Rich saw this kind of side to him that was very business orientated, super business orientated. All his decisions were made on business, all of them. Us guys, anybody that left the band in such a way that was not the best way, it was business. It was not personal. It was business. I saw, since he came back to Nova Scotia, I saw a transition in him from that type of individual, which you have to be in the music business if you're going to make it. You know, you have to be that way.
Yeah.
To judging, trying to figure out if these people try to get something out of me, are they going to pay me, or you know, all this stuff with business, and it's not the nicest business in the world, as we all know. And I saw this transition in him over 10 years of him suddenly start really caring about other people. Like he gave, for instance, he gave me a guitar, a Martin guitar, 5, 6 years ago. And it took me right back to when my dad had bought the bass for me so that Myles could have a guitar to start playing. Well, he gave me that bass that guitar in return. And then 2 weeks before he died, 3 weeks before he died, I don't know, it was a little longer than that, maybe a month. He came in, he wanted to come in and see me. So he drove in from Fall River to come in, and he had this guitar, a brand new guitar, another brand new guitar. And it happened to be one that I had played and liked. And he gave it to me. And he did this with other people. I just saw a complete transition from that person that was kind of always in the business mode and couldn't cross over to the maybe more human loving each other and caring for each other and giving to each other. And I saw that side to him develop over the last few years, 5, 6 years. I don't know what it was. And it was really neat. It was really nice. And I saw a compassionate, caring human being, which, because we knew him so much on the business level, we didn't see that much, but it was in there. It was in there. So that's my beautiful memory of he had made a transition.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's something else. I know we'll all, I really sincerely hope that you're able to finish that Christmas song, Jim, and we'll all look forward to that. Just one more question. I guess we'll start with Ritchie. If you had the opportunity to speak with Myles one last time, is there anything that you would want to say to Myles?
Actually, I don't know if it sounds odd or not. I'd like to tell him what my favorite songs were, actually, and like Fast Train. To this day, I never get tired of hearing Fast Train. Later on, Mama Lie from, I think it's from the Whole World's Going Crazy album. I love Mama
Yeah.
Lie. From our second or third album, Lady Run, Lady Hide, and Flow River Flow was always one of my. Flow River Flow was written while we were in that ski shack up north, and it references things that, like the pond that was about 100 yards away from our ski shack, and the neighbor's dog Grover, one of those beautiful golden Labrador retrievers named Grover, and Myles put him in the song. Grover is in the song. I remember those are the things I would like to have talked to him about, the good times. I always remember the good times more than anything. I think I tend to put the bad times in little boxes on a shelf somewhere up here, and put them on the back burner. It's the good times I remember. And again, like I said, fishing early in the morning. None of us we didn't get up very early in the morning after that. I think it was only for the first couple of months. Then we became real musicians and got up at noon. And of course, times on the road, fun on the road, driving through Northern Ontario in our when we had our limousine, and we're on the road with Mash McCann, and they were driving Terry Flood's car. And we're driving side by side on the Trans-Canada, throwing firecrackers at each other that we picked up at some store along the way. I remember all those the silly, great things we did, and some of the really great shows that we did. Going on stage at Massey Hall for the Maple Music Junket, and going on stage. One of the last gigs that we played before David and I left the band at Ontario Place there, where we got seriously mobbed by the Teeny Boppers, because the Teeny Boppers really loved us. It was fun, but it was kind of scary. Those are the things I'd like to talk to Myles about. How did you feel about that? Kind of thing. But here we are. Yeah. Like I said, I'm left with all kinds of great memories, and that's that.
Absolutely. David, is there anything that you would like to say to Myles if you could have one last conversation?
Oh boy. You know, I guess what I would want to say to Myles is that I'm really, really happy that he found peace. He died, Myles died in a state of grace. And he found peace before he died. I would just want to say to him that that means the world to me. That means that's how I will remember Myles. And I just want to say to him, it means the world to me. I mean, there's a lot I'd like to say to him about my respect for his, for what he's accomplished as a Canadian musician, and and I would go overboard with that. But the fact that Myles found peace before he passed, that's how I'll remember him, and I'm just overwhelmed with respect for that man.
Jim, I know you did have that last conversation. Is there anything that you feel like maybe was left out?
Was Myles the last conversation?
Yeah.
Well, my wife and I were with him when he passed. So,
Okay.
and it was interesting because he talked a lot for quite a while. He talked to the family, he talked to us, and so I have that memory. As far as what I would like to say, gee, that's a really, I guess I would probably say that, it's a long way from Woody's termites.
Quite
It's
a
a long way
ride.
it's a long way from Woody's termites, Myles.
Yeah.
And I'm going to miss you.
I think a lot of
It's about-
people would be missing.
Yeah, that's about it.
We're
And
all gonna miss.
I'm going to finish, and I'd say I'm going to finish your song for you, your Christmas song. I'll finish it, brother.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, I want to thank the three of you for taking the time out of your day to do this with me. And I think that you all honor Myles' legacy, and that is amazing. Thanks so much for doing this. And Myles Goodwyn, rest in peace.
Rest in peace, brother.
Thanks for the ride, brother. It was a great one.
Yeah, he had a great ride. Thanks, Tommy.
Amen. Thank you, Tommy.
Thanks, Tommy.
Tommy Solo's Famous Friends is a one-man production, meaning that I've done all the work, including recording, editing, guest acquisition, etc. And hey, here's some news. We've just recently joined forces with 519 Magazine, so you can check out my interviews there as well. The theme song for Tommy Solo's Famous Friends is a clip from my original composition, The Burn, all rights reserved. If you enjoy the show and you'd like to help us keep it going, why don't you click on the Buy Me a Coffee link in the show notes. Hit the like button, subscribe, all that stuff. We really appreciate it. You can find me on Facebook and Instagram. And until next time, cheers.